Hi there. Thank you for watching my transmission today. Uh, some of you might have already checked the presentation that I did yesterday in Portuguese, and today we're gonna talk about Esperanto as a living language, but this time in English. Um, okay, so give me just a second for me to set things up. Hello, Lilia. Lilia or Andre, who is on? And Fernando. Fernando is on too. Thank you. Tanya, thank you. Okay, so we're ready to start. First, I would like to thank all the organizers of this Polyglot Congress, and especially Jimmy Mello, and also all the people that have seen me online yesterday and today uh, as we begin this presentation in English. Hello, Ingrid, how are you? Okay, so I would like to give a brief history of Esperanto first, because some of you might not know exactly what Esperanto is. But Esperanto is a created language, a planned language, and it was created in 1887 by a Polish optician called Louis Zamenhof. And by the time he was 16, he lived in a city called Bialystok, which at the time was part of Russia and nowadays is a part of Poland. And at the time, four languages were spoken in Bialystok: German, Russian, Polish, and Yiddish. So he spoke all the four of them, but he thought at 16 that many people who had conflicts in his city uh, did so because they did not understand each other, because they spoke different languages. So he decided to create his own language, a language that would help people understand each other, and that would be more regular and more and easier to understand and to speak. Uh, that way, he already knew many languages. He knew something like 12 languages, and most of them were European languages, and especially Latin and French, which were the international languages of that time. And he decided to. He also knew some English, and he decided to mix the advantages of English, which was a lot simpler than Latin in the grammar, and the advantages of Latin in pronunciation and writing uh, towards English. Uh, then he started corresponding with some people, and they started writing back. At that time, of course, we didn't have the internet, so people would write to each other, and sometimes the letters would take months to get from one place to the other. And soon enough, they had the first Esperanto World Congress, which was held in France, in a city called, oh, just forgot it, sorry, Boulogne-sur-Mer. And then every year since then, we have had an Esperanto Congress in a different city, in a different country every year. Uh, of course, we had some interruptions during the Great Wars, but ever since, we always have an international, or I mean, a World Esperanto Congress. Um, so this presentation of mine is the result of research that I did as I was taking my master's degree in linguistics at the University of Brasilia. And we were searching to find if new words were coming into the language, and if by so doing the vocabulary was getting greater, and the language could be considered a living language. Actually, later on, I'm going to talk to you about the Esperanto postulates, which are the postulates that I had to create in order to define what is a living language. Because at the time of my research, 2007, there wasn't an international consensus on what would be considered living language. So we had in 2010 we had some groups of linguists create the International Table of Language Vivacity, and we're going to later talk about this too. Okay, so why was Esperanto needed in the world? Because, for example, take the case of the European Union. We had, in the year of 2008, we had 60 million euros spent on translation and interpretation alone. And in 2009, it was 50 million euros that were spent on language translation and interpretation. They have 24 official and working languages. This was the situation in 2009. And the commissioner uses only 3 of them: English, French, and German. How many African countries could benefit from these millions of euros each year if the European Union didn't have to spend so much money with that alone? So, like I said, Esperanto was created in 1887, and it has around 130 years of history and culture, right? So it is actually a baby language. In terms of linguistics, 130 years is practically nothing. And it is spoken now in more than 120 countries, of a total of 195. And virtually every world literature masterpiece has already been translated. In 2007, it was the 17th most used language on the internet. And this you can check on a site called www.internetworldstats.com. Actually, all this data you can find on a PowerPoint presentation that I have prepared, both in Portuguese and in English. So if you are interested in receiving that, you can contact me directly, privately, and I will send it to you either in Portuguese or in English, or both. I told you about the Esperanto postulates. So what are they? They are postulates that say the requisites for a language to be considered a living language. So, for example, there should be fluent speakers. There should be frequent written correspondence between the users. There should be newspapers, magazines, and books published in that language. There should be periodical radio and TV broadcasting in the language. There should be lexical evolution in such language as a result of the previous fundaments. Of course, not all these requisites are necessarily going to be present for a language to be considered a living language. But if you have 2 or 3 of them that are met, so you you can be sure that that is a living language. And the last one would be, there should be a society of speakers who use the language daily. And of course, this is the case of Esperanto since the beginning, because this requisite doesn't say how big the society has to be, but especially now that we have the internet, many people from practically all the countries in the world can communicate with each other in real time using Esperanto, or actually as any other language, yes. But so the vivacity, the language vivacity table that I was telling you about was devised by some linguists in 2010, so after my research, and they have some degrees of vivacity that go from an extinct language to a language that is used modernly and is considered a state language. You can check it out at on the site called Omniglot, which most of you might know because you are polyglots. Yes. Let's see. Reinaldo Oliveira has already joined us. Thank you, Reinaldo. Marcus Werneck just joined us too. Thank you very much. So, about neologisms in Esperanto, there are two main principles for the formation of new words in Esperanto. First is the principle of necessity, and the second is the principle of sufficiency. These two principles were devised by a linguist called René de Saussure, who was the brother of Ferdinand de Saussure. The principle of necessity says that only those morphemes will be added that evoke clearly the idea that one wants to convey. So you are going to put in the new word the morphemes that mean what you want to convey and nothing else. And the principle of sufficiency says that one must avoid pleonasms and ideas foreign to what should be expressed. So I'm going to show an example for you here. Just a second. Here, this word. With the morpheme home, which means human, and the morpheme vertebre, which means vertebrate, the morpheme ul, ul, which means individual, the morpheme age, which means concrete thing, and the morpheme o, which means the ending of a noun. It means that the word is a noun. So in this case, you don't need the three morphemes that are in between the word, vertebre, ul, age, because the morpheme home, which means human, already has the idea of vertebrate, individual, and concrete thing. So the word would be homo. The word blue in Esperanto means blue, and color means color. Et means quality, and o is the ending for a noun. So blue colorezzo is not needed because the word blue already has the idea of color and of quality. So the new word would be bluo, and so on with other words too. Yeah. Just a second. Oh, hello, Karina. How are you? Hello, Marcel. Hello, Edson. Hello, Anita. Thank you very much for being present at my presentation. Okay, so neologisms in Esperanto. Esperantists usually follow the same paths as Zamenhof in creating the new words. For example, they shorten up the word. For example, hidrargo which means mercury, was formed from the word hydrargyrus, from Latin. And busso, which means bus, was formed from the word omnibus, from Latin too. They also avoid homonyms. For example, the word lava, which came from the Italian word lava, turned into lafo in Esperanto because they didn't want it to coincide with lavi, which means to wash. They avoid radical endings or beginnings that look like an affix. For example, limite in French, which means limit, became limo in Esperanto. Crépuscule in French, which means twilight, became crepusco. So they avoided the endings it, which is used for the ending of a participle, a past participle in Esperanto, and the ending ul, which means individual, as we have already seen. They also avoid polysemy. Polysemy means one word having many meanings, or two or more meanings. So, for example, the word accordi means to agree, and agordi with a G means to tune. For example, to tune a piano. Generalo means a military general, and generala means general, common, yes? Conscio means a sense of self, and conscienzo means conscience. They also try to achieve internationality by a compromise between several national forms. So, for example, the word in English, forget, plus the word in German, vergessen, we came up with the word forgesi. Forgesi is to forget in Esperanto. The English word stone and the German word Stein made up the word stono in Esperanto. As you are listening to me, if you feel like asking a question, or if you want to make any comment, please do so, because I can follow up on what you are writing right here. So, neologism is not consensus as a concept in linguistics. Many linguists have different concepts of what is a neologism. And according to the view adopted, you have several interpretations that are different. The most accepted definition among the linguists for neologism is any word that was formed and created anew in the language, or a new meaning of an old word. Yes, so it can be a new form, or it can be a new meaning for an old form. And in my work, in my book, which is this book right here, actually this book is published only in Portuguese. But if anybody out there is interested in translating it into English or any other language, I'm willing to give you the rights. Okay, so in my work, we have three types of neologisms. Type 1 neologism is a word that does not show in the official vocabulary of 1905 and still haven't entered a dictionary officially. Type 2 are the words that appear in the 2005 Nova PIV dictionary, but without the mark of officialization. And type 3 neologisms are words that are not at the moment in any Esperanto dictionary. Many people who don't know much about Esperanto, they think that Esperanto doesn't have slang or doesn't have jargon. Just a second. But this is not true. And I'm going to show you some examples of slang jargon in Esperanto. So, Broso in Esperanto means brush, but it is a slang for a mustache. Cerbofulmo is literally a brain lightening, which means an insight. Disco erraro, or disc error, can mean two things. First, a fader, and second, someone who is completely crazy. Enhaki is a verb, and it means to hit with a hatchet. Or it is a slang to interrupt rudely someone. Kabei is a very Esperanto-ish word because it was created with only Esperanto elements. It is the abbreviation of the name of one of the great Esperantists in the world called Kazimierz Bain. And Kabei is to caveat, if we can say that. It is a completely new word because it means to give up in the movement, to give up the movement, to desert. Yeah, because this Esperantist, he decided to leave the movement of Esperanto after many years of good work there. And krokodili is perhaps the most widely known slang in Esperanto, which it means to crocodile, and the actual meaning is to speak in a national language when Esperanto is needed. And you have many other examples, like vaki is to squawk, which means to speak. And miaui, which is to meow, means to complain. And so on and so forth. So we do have a lot of slangs, and we do have a lot of jargons in Esperanto. There are three interesting examples here that I found during my research. I'm going to show you. Panencephalito is a word that was created basically based in Latin, and it of course means panencephalitis, which is a medical term. And I found out that most medical terms in Esperanto tend to come from the Latin basis, and but some of them do not. For example, shaftremo. Shafo means sheep, and tremo means trembling, or so it is a term for the medical. It is a medical term for the disease called scrapie in English, which is characteristic of the sheep. Oh, my Uncle Pedro is there. João Carlos, hello. Lúcia Carluccio, hi, how are you? Thank you for watching. Okay, now the case of Francujo versus Francio. In the beginning, in Esperanto, all the endings of the countries were ui, because it means a continent, a container actually. And Francujo was the container of the Francoi, which were the ethnic group called the Franks. Yes, and some Esperantists they decided to create a new word called Francio, because they felt that they were misrepresented because they were not Franks and they lived in France. And France, Francio should mean the name of the country regardless of the people in it. And so nowadays we have a fight between these two trends. So some people use Francujo, Germanujo, Anglujo, Polujo, or Polando, and some others use Francio, Germanio, Anglio, and so on. And the word pitango is a word that came from Portuguese into Esperanto, and it meant two things. First, the bird called the flycatcher, or in some other parts of the world it's called kiskabi. And the second word, the second meaning was pitanga, which is a fruit that is characteristic of Brazil. And so many people decided in Brazil to create new words that could end this polysemy. And they created the words pitanguso for the bird and pentuvio for the bird. Pentuvio for the bird and pitanguso for the fruit. Just a second. Okay, so as I was saying, if you're listening to this and you want to make any questions um, or any comments, you can write down there, and I will try to answer it as possible. Ciao, Lucia. How are you? The pronoun "si," for example, in the beginning, they had a pronoun for the word "you," the formal "you," and for the informal "you," because many European languages have different words for "you." A formal and an informal. For example, in French you have tu and vous. In German you have du and sie. And the use of these words is not a consensus between these languages. And of course, the word "ci," which meant the informal "you" in the beginning of Esperanto, was considered very quickly as an old word, a word that shouldn't be used anymore. And so you can say that you already have archaisms in Esperanto, even if it's a baby language. My research, I worked with 20 words that, well, actually in linguistics we call them lexes, which are units of reading. And we showed the list of 20 words to many people who were taking part in the World Congress of Esperanto in Italy. And we asked them to say which of these 20 words were considered neologisms or new words. And actually, all the words in the list were neologisms. But actually, for the person to answer the query, he or she had to have had at least 2 years of Esperanto study. And the words that almost everybody, almost 100% of the people who wrote that word was a neologism, they wrote about these 3 words: ombudsmano, which is a word that came directly from Swedish, ombudsman, and posttelefono, which means cell phone, and videodisc apparato, which means a CD player. And of course, you know that these words are kind of new in most languages, and but all the other words were also considered neologisms. Sorry. They were also considered neologisms in the scientific manner. But we were researching on the sense of neologicity, because we would like to know if a word was new in Esperanto, was it considered to be new by many people, many speakers? Because sometimes neologisms in some languages, they are not felt as being new words, but just a combination of elements from the same language. So for example, German, you can form many new words just by combining elements of other words. And hello Silvandino, how are you? Okay, many people think that Esperanto is not a living language because it doesn't have native speakers, but this is not true. Actually, it hasn't been true for a while because uh, we are now on the third generation of Esperanto native speakers. Because some people teach Esperanto as the first language to their children, and these children tend to teach to their children also Esperanto as a first language. So this is the third or fourth generation that we have of people who spoke Esperanto as their first language. But some people might say that this is a disadvantage for Esperanto because if more people are native speakers of Esperanto, then we would have a disadvantage towards the other people who are not natives. But this is not true because, first of all, these children, or some of them are not even children anymore, but most of these native speakers are spread out all over the world. So they are not living in the same place. And it is very difficult then for them to build an advantage in terms of being more fluent than the other Esperanto speakers. And actually, being a native speaker of Esperanto doesn't mean that this person will be more fluent than any other Esperanto speaker, because it depends on the fluency that his or her parents had when they taught him the language. And strangely enough, their parents are usually people who speak the same language. Because in the beginning of the research, I thought that most native speakers would be the children of people who spoke different languages and that had Esperanto as a common language. But this was not the truth. And we used to have a list of all the native speakers in the world that was online. But because of safety reasons, they decided to put down that list. So we don't have it anymore. And like I said, Esperanto is a baby language, but it has already some types of success that some other languages that are 100 years or more than hundreds of years old do not have. Because, for example, the Wikipedia in Esperanto, it is one of the fastest growing Wikipedias, and it was created by the same creators of the Duolingo Esperanto course, and it has been among the 20 biggest Wikipedias in the world. Some people say, but is Esperanto an official language anywhere in the world? Actually, this was not the objective of Esperanto from the beginning. It has never been. It is not desirable that Esperanto be a that it be politically recognized as official language in any country, because the language Esperanto was created to be the second language of everybody and not the first language of anybody. So in the case of a country adopting Esperanto as an official language, with time this would be in disadvantage for the idea of Esperanto, because it would create a disadvantage for the other people who were not natives of that country which has the language as official. Nevertheless, the UN has pronounced itself favorable towards Esperanto twice. In 1954 and in 1985, they advised all the members of the United Nations to adopt Esperanto as a working language, as a working international language. Actually, now I have to talk to you about the difference between a universal and an international or transnational language. we don't say that Esperanto is a universal language, because universal would mean that it would substitute all the other languages. And this has never been the goal of the Esperanto speakers. Like I said, it was meant to be the second language of everybody. So if you are talking to your locals, you would use your mother language. But if you are talking to someone from a different nation, from a different country, or who use a different language in the same country, you would then use Esperanto. And so a transnational language is a language that was created with this purpose. No national language was created to be an international language. So why not? Because there are some characteristics that a language has to have in order to be ideal for international purposes. For example, it has to have an easy system of pronunciation and writing. And English is far from that, because, for example, I'm going to give a very good example at the end of the presentation, but we can say that if you don't know a word and it appears to you in the middle of a text, in English, you would not know how to pronounce it unless you had already had some contact with that language. With that language, with that word before. There is no logic to the way the writing is related to pronunciation in English. So it is not ideal for international purposes, because actually it has some sounds that are difficult for many speakers of different languages. And there is a lot of variation between the pronunciation of vowels in English. So if you listen to an Australian speaking English, or then you listen to somebody from India speaking English, or somebody from the US, so you will find many differences in the way they pronounce specific words. And this can be a problem, for example, in air travel, because many accidents with airplanes have been caused by the use of English by non-native speakers. So sometimes they get confused with the pronunciation of some words, and they can cause an accident because of the misinterpretation of some words. In the case of Esperanto, it is created in a way that every letter represents only one sound, and every sound has only one letter representing it. So it is completely phonetic, and if you learn the alphabet of Esperanto, you can automatically know how to pronounce any word in the language. There's no exception. Actually, Esperanto has only 16 grammar rules and also no exceptions for them. So it is very, very easy and very fast for you to learn the grammar of the language. And then all you have to do is build on the vocabulary. Usually people need from 1 to 2 years of studies in Esperanto to speak good Esperanto. And if you compare to English, which for most people who do not speak English and learn English as an adult or even as a child, they would take around 6 to 8 years to have a good domain of the language. But now, talking about officializing Esperanto as a working language again, we can say that some media giants like Google or Facebook, they have already adopted Esperanto as a normal working language. So it is possible for everybody to turn their profile on Facebook completely in Esperanto. So you can have everything there written in Esperanto. And the Google Translate has already been using Esperanto as a bridge language for the translations for many years. And actually, they had a study and they compared the use of English and the use of Esperanto as a bridge language for translation. So that means they would translate, say, from German to English and from English back to German. And they would compare the result when they translated from German to Esperanto and then from Esperanto back to German. And the result of this process was a lot more, it was a lot better when they used Esperanto because of the regularity of the language. Um China, since 2010, has adopted Esperanto as an official language for propaganda, not as an official language of the country, but for making known the projects and the laws, the actions of the government in China. So, together with other 9 national languages, Esperanto has been treated by China as just a normal language, just like any other. And there is a university in Hungary called Eötvös Loránd, which is responsible for the international certification of proficiency in Esperanto. The same way as we have the European reference setting, yes, of proficiency, and the International Science Academy in San Marino has adopted Esperanto as the only working language. And now let's talk a little bit about the phenomenon called Duolingo. Ever since Duolingo decided to start an Esperanto course, the numbers of people who have been studying Esperanto online have grown a lot, very, very, very considerably. So, for example, the course of Esperanto on Duolingo for speakers of English has attained 595,000 students, that is half a million, in just a little bit more than 2 years. And the course of Esperanto for speakers of Spanish has achieved 4,000 students in 1 week. Actually, it achieved 4,000 students in 1 week, but now it has a lot more than that because it's been months now that it has been created. And most of the learners of Esperanto in Duolingo are in the US. And we believe, with the Esperantists, we think that now that the Americans are learning Esperanto, probably it will have a boost because many Americans are known for being very they are good entrepreneurs, and they are going to put Esperanto to good use. They are going to use it for profit. And we know that for a language to grow quickly, it has to attract people financially. And we are going to talk a little bit in a while about some companies that have already been profiting on Esperanto for many years. The Esperanto course for Spanish speakers, it has the goal of serving people from any country that speaks Spanish. So it won't be something only for Spaniards, but it will be something that can be used in the Americas or any other place where they speak Spanish. So I'm gonna show you three companies that are big in Esperantujo. Esperantujo is the world of Esperanto speakers. So these are the biggest. Intra Expo, which is a company that does business only in Esperanto. And it started in Brazil, and now they have some branches in Europe and in Asia. And they are making the bridge between businesses in China, in Europe, and in South America, using only Esperanto as a working language. Vinyl Cosmo, which is the second company there, it is a record company, and it has been on for many years, and it only publishes CDs and DVDs that are produced in Esperanto. And the other symbol there that you see is of Amikumu, which is an applicative that you can put in your cell phone or your tablet. And I'm not going to talk much about this because there is going to be a presentation on this later on today by Richard Delamore, one of the creators. And all I can tell you is that it's going to help people find other people who speak Esperanto anywhere in the world. And talking about this, many people asked me, how many people speak Esperanto in the world? And this is a very difficult question to answer, because it would be like trying to find how many people ride bikes in the world, because not everybody who speaks Esperanto is registered in any kind of association. So it is very difficult to know exactly, but from studies that we have in many countries, which Esperanto is represented in, like I said, more than 120 countries of a total of 195. So we have some estimates that the number of speakers of Esperanto would be around 10 million today, most of them in China. Actually, in China, it is not called Esperanto. It is called world language. And some people have been studying Esperanto there in classes of more than 400 people. So you see that China is really investing on this purpose. And like I was saying, Esperanto is a baby language, but it has already a lot of success linguistically wise, because many languages that are not artificial or that are very old, for example, the Nordic languages, they do not have more than 10 million people speaking them. So, for example, Swedish would be around 10 million people, and Swedish is a very old language. Danish, Norwegian, they have about 6 million each. Icelandic has fewer than that. And Finnish, which is not a Indo-European language, but anyway, it doesn't have many more speakers than Esperanto either. So, in a way, you can say that Esperanto is already a success, linguistically wise. But you can also measure this by taking a look at how many online courses we have for Esperanto. And some other national languages have never had an online course. So this is the symbol for the Duolingo course. It is completely free, so you can join it. And if you speak English or Spanish, you can learn Esperanto for free. And it's like a game, so you can have fun while learning it. And this is the symbol for Memrise, which is also partially free, but you can pay for the professional version. Lerno is an online course that is basically dealing with the grammar, and memorize dealing mostly with words, with vocabulary. Then you have a course in Portuguese called Esperanto em 12 dias. And you have another course which is also in 12 lessons called Curso de Esperanto, but is totally in Esperanto. So anywhere in the world you can learn Esperanto with this course. And it was created by the Brazilian Carlos Pereira. And as I see, not many people are asking anything during the presentation, so I take it that I'm explaining things in a way that people can understand. So I hope so. If you understand everything that I'm saying, that I have said so far, please write down that you understand. Okay, talking about publicization of Esperanto. Of course, Esperanto does not have the economic power or the political power or the historic power of the speakers of English, for example, or the speakers of the main European languages. But the marketing of Esperanto is done by word of mouth. So if you have been watching this presentation, and if you think that it is a good idea to have equality between the countries, to have to preserve each country's sovereignty and each people's native language, then you are someone who already can be considered an Esperantist. Yeah, and so now all you have to do is learn Esperanto as a language, which would, for most of you who are polyglots, would take something like a couple of hours. Yes, because it is a very regular language, and like I said, it has only 16 grammar rules and no exceptions. So if you identify yourselves with the ideals of preservation of culture and preservation of languages and equality among the peoples, then you are responsible too. And you could join esperanto.org.br or www.esperanto.net. Every country where they have Esperanto speakers have their own National Esperanto Association. So you can find that online, and you can join that association even if you do not speak the language yet. Another way of making this known is my book. So if you read in Portuguese, you can buy my book. You can just write to me privately, and I'll send it to you. And it is my contribution to the academic world. I'm showing the linguists what Esperanto is about, because many linguists criticize Esperanto without even knowing much about it. And so I demystify what Esperanto is, and especially what it is not. And also in my book you can find the 16 grammar rules that I told you about, so you can start studying right off my book. And so my book, or my research, has proven that Esperanto is a living language, because at the end we found out that we had thousands and thousands of words coming into the language every month. And so this is one of the basic requisites for a language to be considered a living language. So it is growing, it is developing. And some people would ask me, but doesn't English substitute Esperanto? And I tell you a very round no, because first there is the question of anti-Americanism. So many people do not like the US, and the U.S. is represented basically by the the English language, yes. And not many people have much against England, where it started, but many people, unfortunately, have many things against the U.S. And so they do not want to learn the language of what they call the I forgot the term now. But anyway, they do not want to learn the language of the United States. And like I said, there is the question of the sovereignty of the countries and the question of the preservation of the languages and the culture. Because, for example, many peoples, Aboriginal peoples in Australia, in the US, in Russia, in India, in Brazil, yes, they have been their language has been their language have been substituted by the national language of their countries. So, for example, in Brazil, many indigenous people are learning Portuguese and forgetting about their own language. And if they didn't have to learn Portuguese, if they could communicate with their fellow national people using Esperanto, then they could preserve their language better. And also, of course, their culture. There is another advantage of Esperanto as an international language, because so far it hasn't developed into dialects. So if you travel, for example, from Scotland to England, only on that big island there, you you will find a lot of differences in the way they pronounce and the way they construct their sentences. And if you, let alone if you go to South Africa or to some countries that speak English in Oceania, yes, and other distant places from England. But we have to think that most of the people who speak English as a native language today in many countries, they do not have English as their native language. So English has substituted their native languages. And we could have avoided that if we used Esperanto as the second language for everybody. And so now to finish, because we're at the end of the presentation, I'm going to show an example for you to know how English is not really ideal for international communication. I'm going to show you some words that are written with the exactly same four letters in English, O-U-G-H, and I'm not going to pronounce them at first, so take a look at them and see if you can pronounce them. And now I'm going to pronounce them for you so that you can notice that there's no logic in the way the English-speaking people write. The first word is thought, the second one is through, the third one is though, the fourth one is tough, the fifth one is plow, and the last one is cough. Yeah, so you can see very different ways of pronouncing the same group of letters in English. And this is only one example. There are many, many others. So right now I'm gonna finish my presentation. I thank everybody who has watched it, and I would invite you to write some questions and or comments that you have about the presentation. And of course, this was my first presentation online. Not the first, because the first one was yesterday, but was in Portuguese. But it was my first English presentation online. And I apologize for anything that might not have been ideal in my presentation. And I would now open the floor so that everybody can make comments or ask questions. Let me see here if anybody has already written anything. Tiago Matos has joined. Thank you. If if nobody has any questions, then I'm going to talk to you a little bit in Esperanto, so that if you had no exposure to it before, you will um, you will be able to listen to it and have the first experience. Yes. So, for example, my the things that I just said about thanking all the people who watched, I'm going to say it in Esperanto now. Mi kore dankas al vi pro via atento, kaj mi invitas vin por aĉeti mian libron, kaj por trinki glason da biero kun mi, kiam vi venas al Brazilo. Do, mi povas vidi ke kelkaj el la homoj kiuj estas en la ĉeestantaro parolas Esperanton. Kaj ekzemple Daiva Vidbikiene. Saluton. Mi kredas ke vi ne parolas Esperanton, sed mi ne certas. Ĉu vi? Kai João Ferreira just joined. Thank you very much. Yes, so I suggest that if you don't have any question, you can ask, for example, how do you say such and such in Esperanto? And I'll try to answer. Okay. Yes, João Ferreira. They were telling me here that my presentation was done only in my timeline. So after I finish this, I'm going to save it and I'm going to send it online to the Polyglot Congress. And so if you didn't have the chance to watch the whole presentation here, you can watch it there. I see that Marcel has just joined. Hello, Marcel. If you have any question about Esperanto, this is the questions and answers time. So I just spoke to people somewhat in Esperanto so that they could have first experience of listening to it and see what it sounds like. And now, if you want to ask me anything, I'm ready to answer. Okay, he was cut off and then he managed to reconnect. Okay, so good. So maybe I should ask you some questions. Yes, for example, I could ask you if you had any experience with Esperanto before this presentation. Maybe you tried to learn it somewhere in the past, or maybe you know someone who speaks Esperanto. And I would like to ask you too why you are curious about Esperanto. What called your attention for this presentation? And if you have any other comment different from this, you can also make it here. Hello, João Vitor. Welcome. So I'm waiting for your answers. I saw here on the timeline that Patricio Bello said in Esperanto, hello, Esperanto, yes, is a living language, and we speak Esperanto in our house. We live in Chile. Um, we have 10 comments, but I can't see the comments. Hmm. Just a second, guys. I'm not a very tech savvy guy, so I'm going to try to find it in the other place here. I can't see it. Okay, João Vitor has written, I'm curious of Esperanto after the Polyglot Congress. Okay, so this was your first contact with it. Okay. Actually, this is one of the problems we face in the Esperanto community, because not many people know about Esperanto, and sometimes when they know about Esperanto, they know through people who don't know much about Esperanto, and they have misconceptions about it. So, for example, many people say that Esperanto was that project of a universal language that never worked. And everything there in this sentence is wrong, because first, it is not a project, because it is already a language. It has been a language for many, many years. Second, it has worked. Like I said, it is more successful than many national languages that are hundreds of years old. And also, it was never meant to be universal, because it's not supposed to substitute any language. Now I see Marcel's written. About 20 years ago, I met a community of Esperanto speakers in Alto Paraíso, a small town in the Brazilian state of Goiás. It was a farm school ran by a German lady and an Italian gentleman. The farm was called Bona Espero and was home to dozens of children who were educated there. I think that I couldn't see the rest of the comment, but yes, I have been to that farm too, and it is very well known in Esperantujo, the world of Esperanto. So people from all over the world, they come to Goiás and they go to that farm, and it used to be a place to raise children with difficulties, social difficulties, and they taught many things there. One of them, Esperanto. But nowadays, it doesn't have any children there. But they have many other projects, and you can find them online. So you can type Bona Espero Farm or Bona Espero Bieno and on in Google, and you will find them. Tanya Regina, hello Tanya. Congratulations. Thank you. Okay, she's missing the classes, and she doesn't know English enough to take the essence of the presentation. She could take the essence of the presentation, but not much more. So sorry to hear that, but there is the presentation that I did yesterday in Portuguese, and you can watch it online. Just scroll down the lines there in the Polyglot Congress, and you will find my presentation in Portuguese too, Tanya. Thank you very much. Let me see. So let's see, we have so far we have 6 people, and if there is any other question, I'm ready to answer. If there is any other comment, please do so. We still have some minutes for the questions and answers. And later on, if you would like to record your own videos talking about the Esperanto issue, you can do so, and I'll publish them together with my presentation. Tânia said, okay. Tânia, obrigado. Desculpa, eu acabei falando em inglês com você. Você pode achar a minha apresentação em português no mesmo local em que você se inscreveu para essa apresentação em inglês. E a apresentação aconteceu ontem, às 7 horas, às 8 horas da noite. Então você pode achar lá no Congresso Poliglota. Muito obrigado. Eu não estou sendo publicado no site principal. Vocês estão assistindo aí só na minha linha do tempo. Reinaldo Oliveira just shared your video. Thank you very much. Algumas pessoas entraram em contato comigo para pedir o livro, mas eu preciso que vocês escrevam o e-mail de vocês para que eu possa responder e enviar o livro. Some people have written to me about the book, and if you want to receive the book, you have to write your email address so that I can send it to you and we can arrange about the transportation. Thank you, Reinaldo, and all the 3 others who just shared my video. Thank you. I really appreciate it, and I hope that this could be the start of a new way of propagating the idea of Esperanto. Danielle, my cousin Venek, joined. Hello, how are you? Welcome. If you missed the beginning of the presentation, you can find it online right after we finish here, or you can find the presentation that was done in Portuguese yesterday at about the same time. There on the same site, Polyglots, the community, you can find my 2 presentations, one in Portuguese and one in English. And if you have any questions, Daniel, then you can write in Portuguese, in English, or in Esperanto, and I will write, and I will try to answer. Two other people have shared my video. Thank you very much. I hope it reaches many other countries and many other people who are interested in languages. Actually, I should have said this in the beginning, but I forgot. This presentation is a presentation about Esperanto, and many people think that Esperanto is not a thing for polyglots because they think erroneously that Esperanto is an enemy of polyglottism, and actually it is the opposite, because the more people speak Esperanto, the more languages are going to be preserved. So actually this is one of the speeches in the Polyglot Congress that really belong here, because if we are talking about learning more and more languages, we have to talk about preserving them. And if everybody turns into 1 or 2 national languages, we're not going to preserve the other languages, just on the contrary. And so, like I said, Esperanto's goal is to be the second language of everybody and not the first language of anybody. We still have 12 minutes So I'm waiting for your comments. I'm waiting for your questions. If you have written a comment before and I haven't read it here, please write it again, because somehow I didn't get to read them. Uh-huh. One more person has just shared my video. Thank you very much for that. And this is actually the way that the marketing is done in the Esperanto world. We go by word of mouth. And I hope that you who have been present at my presentation can also help me spread the word. And we will reach more and more people who like languages and who like learning languages, and of course who would like to preserve as many languages as we can, because it is a fact, now I'm talking as a linguist, that there are between 6,000 and 7,000 languages in the world nowadays, and one or two of these languages is dying every week. So we have to do something about it. And one serious thing that we can do to stop this decimation of languages is by teaching other people how to speak Esperanto and making them use their native language with their locals, and use specifically devised international language as Esperanto, in order to communicate with people who have other languages as native languages. We still have 5 people watching, and we still have 10 minutes for questions and answers, or comments, or if you want to record a video and send it to me, then I can publish it together with my presentation. So I see that nobody is asking any question. So I'm going to finish my presentation now, finish the questions and answer section. And I would like to thank you all again for watching me and for sharing my video and for spreading the idea of Esperanto throughout the world. And I would like to thank the organization of the Polyglot Congress, the online Congress, and especially Jimmy Mello, the founder of the Congress. So thank you very much, and we'll see each other somewhere in the world, hopefully speaking good Esperanto. Thank you very much. Dankon, plezure.